Yeah, so hi everyone, and welcome to our series where we interview computer science faculty about their job search and interviewing experience. And today we are here with Shweta Shinde, who joined ETH Zurich as an assistant professor in October 2020. Shweta's research lies at the intersection of trusted computing, system security, program analysis, and also formal verification. So it's great to have you here, Shweta.
Thanks, Nigel. Happy to be here.
Yeah, could you tell us a bit more about yourself and also your career path?
First of all, I'm happy to share my experience, and hopefully some of this will help all the faculty candidates in the next coming cycles. So about me, I did my undergraduate back in India. After that, I was really interested in research, but I was not sure whether I want to commit myself to a 5-year PhD program. So that's when I went to National University of Singapore as a research intern. So I took a 1-year break, did research without any commitment, and that's when I realized, okay, this is something I want to really do. And at that point, NUS was pretty good place for me. I found the right advisor. And so I decided to not even apply broadly and just continue as a PhD student there. After that, during my PhD, I did an internship. So I visited Intel in summer of 2017. And yeah, then after graduation, I went to Berkeley as a postdoc. And then now I'm at ETH Zurich. So that's my career path. And research-wise, I think I started off as a person who did operating systems research in my undergraduate, and then eventually I moved to system security, and pretty much I've been doing that ever since.
And how has your life at ETH Zurich been so far? So how well have you adjusted to this, yeah, I guess, completely different environment?
Yeah, so one advantage, I guess, for me was that I have been to various places and so on. So I'm pretty used to different cultures and lifestyles. However, yeah, this is my first time staying in Europe for such a long time. Uh, Also, a caveat was that I moved during the pandemic, not the best time to relocate. But so far, it's been working out quite well. ETH and Zurich in general have been pretty efficient. I was pleasantly surprised that everything just works. I was mentally prepared that there'll be some hiccups because of the pandemic and so on. But so far, it's working out quite well. The staff and my colleagues here at ETH are super friendly and accommodating. Yeah, so moving to ETH has been pretty easy. Moving to Zurich, I've not been out anywhere, so it's very difficult to say about anything about Zurich. But so far, no complaints.
Okay, sounds good. And yeah, based on your experience that you had so far, starting as an assistant professor, so what kind of advice would you have for future faculty candidates that just started? Are there any like kind of takeaways that you can already share?
I'm about to finish a year in October. Looking back, I think research-wise, things have really slowed down, which was a big kind of a surprise. But then people tell me this is normal; it's expected. So the big change is that you're at the peak of your research when you're in your PhD or your postdoc. You're about to graduate. You have a bunch of papers in the pipeline, and certainly because of job market and interviews, there's some gap, right? And then you move to a new place, you have to start new collaborations. Depending on where you are, you might have to also raise grant and funding before you kick off projects and so on. So there's certainly some gap in your publication pipeline, or at least your research output might decrease. Fortunately for me, what I did was I had mentally prepared again that first year I'm going to invest my time wisely in setting up everything. So mostly what I've been doing is trying to get good students. I have my group set up. Small things like setting up the lab, it takes a lot of time. And then more importantly, setting up collaborations with new colleagues. So this is something I decided to do before I get in students. So that was a good investment. And while doing all this, as I said, there have been other papers which have been in the pipeline, and so just pushing them out so that the research cycle continues. So I think this is the big change that you have to adapt to. And then the other big change has been just so much of managerial work, which which again comes as a big surprise for new faculty. Is now you're basically responsible for everything, and you have to spend a lot of time in just logistics. I think the third big change, at least for me, has been a lot of service requests, right? So everything from committees, be it research, be it university level service, and so on. So that also eats up a big chunk of your time, and then learning how to distribute your time evenly has been an interesting change, and hopefully I'm adapting well to that. So coming back to your question, the advice I would give out is that use your first year to set up all these things. It's okay if you have to slow down your research a bit. Think of it as a strategic investment. And then the biggest high that you should use is that you've just coming out of the market, you've been introduced to so many people, and both in your areas and outside your area. So that's a good way of kicking off collaborations, exploring research areas outside your comfort zone, and sort of expanding your expertise. So that's something which is very difficult to quantify, but looking back, that's certainly something I appreciate.
That's great advice. I will also try to follow that.
And so that's why I said, right, it really depends where you're going. So some places you have to raise a lot of grants before you can hire students, whereas in some universities you're guaranteed a few students and so on. So yeah, also I think in the US, people spend a lot of their time writing NSF grants and applying to career grants and so on, whereas in the rest of in non-US places, there is no such immediate pressure. So yeah, you have to talk with your colleagues and specific to your country to kind of plan this out.
To expand on that, because you did your PhD in Singapore, right? I will also train as NUS in Singapore, and right. Now you're at ETH Zurich, and in my mind, somewhat Switzerland and Singapore are very similar in some sense, because they're both small countries, they're both innovation focused, and they also attract many talents in the region and beyond. So what's your take on this? Are there any kind of similarities also in terms of academic system also?
So that's actually a good question. Definitely there are a lot of similarities, and that was one of the reasons why my decision was easier moving out of the US. So a few things that are common. First is that both ETH and NUS are considered as top schools in that region, in Europe or in Asia for NUS. And so that attracts a lot of good students who, for whatever reason, don't want to move to the US or Canada or basically North America. So that's good. There is a lot of good local talent. The other important aspect is there's a lot of excitement around technology and especially security in both these countries. There's a lot of investment that the government and industry does. And so to put it simply, there's just a lot of grant money. You don't have to put in as much effort as, let's say, you have to do in the US. At least that's been my experience. So usually money or funding is not a big concern. The concern is, okay, how do we wisely use this? How do you hire good students, retain them, and so on. So that's a bit of a different setup if you're in Singapore or Switzerland. I think the other interesting aspect is the local economy. So a lot of the research that you do in the university, it's very easy to commercialize it, setting up startups and so on. Both these countries are good places to do startups. And it's relatively easy to find local talent, right? Because students who are graduating from these schools, they don't want to leave the country, right? They're pretty content with the quality of life and so on. And so it's a lot of the students stay back, do startups, undergrads stay back to do research and so on. So that aspect of retaining the talent is sort of helpful for at least research. What else? I think, yeah, in general, quality of life is also something to me. I personally felt that it's better. Students are paid quite well at both the places. Yes, both cities are expensive, but the salaries are higher, so students can have a very comfortable life. Also, for whatever reason, there is a lot of exciting activities happening around. So if you're in Switzerland, you can travel around Europe. If you're in Singapore, you can travel around Asia. Go around just for a weekend and come back. So taking breaks is also much easier. And because the students are from the area, they also can visit their hometowns quite frequently. So there's just some factors which help reduce the stress for students, which I didn't realize until I left to the US and then had to experience all that. So that to me is also something that students might consider, especially now that there are so many options. And I think the other aspect for both these schools is that the faculties are, the colleagues that you will be working with are also quite renowned, and they are super enthusiastic about the research. They are super helpful for mentoring junior faculty and so on. So that's the other thing. When I was at NUS, I realized is that this first of all, the faculty size is quite large, and it's almost easy to find collaborators within the department, and so that also helps a lot. So you can take up large projects where you need 4 or 5 faculty to commit. You don't have to do cross-university collaborations. You can do it organically within the university. So that again also is something, especially in systems and security research, is important. If you want to do impactful work, you can't shoulder it all by yourself. You need colleagues to pitch in. So yeah, these are the factors. Again, I'm not saying you won't get all of this if you go to US, but these are the things which a lot of people are not aware of, be it about Switzerland or Singapore.
Makes sense.
And I think, yeah, one last thing, I think that we started this discussion because of I think I said something about students and funding. So at least in Singapore, first of all, the students are funded by the department, and which in turn is funded by the Ministry of Education, the MOE. So each faculty is guaranteed to have a certain set of PhD students, no questions asked, right? So the grant doesn't come from the advisor, the grant comes from the government. So this gives students the freedom to switch advisors without having to, accommodate for funding and so on. So that's good, because when you join, you don't have to worry about raising money. There is guaranteed money. I think back when I was a PhD student, I remember, I think each assistant professor was allowed like 4 or 5 students or something like that. And after tenure, the number increases. So that's great, right? If you're guaranteed 4 or 5 students, then you can focus on getting your research up and running. It's a bit similar at ETH as well. The number is a bit lower, but the department funds a certain number of students directly. You don't have to raise funds for that. So that's, again, was helpful for me, because then I could start hiring students without having to wait for grant money and so on to come in. So yeah, those are the, I would say, salient factors about these countries, and ETH and NUS in particular. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's insightful. And also to add on, like, students at NUS being, or in Singapore in general, being funded by the government. I think that's also very useful for the students because, for example, if they are not happy with the advisor or so, then they can still easily change the advisor, right, without having to worry about their funding too much.
Yeah. In fact, there's more to it, right? So when the students are admitted to NUS, they are not admitted to a particular professor, right? So there's a free pool of students. They get to visit labs, right? So they get to work with 2 labs as a part of their first semester. And I think they have about 6 to 9 months to decide who their advisor is going to be. So in the beginning itself, they get to explore and decide. Of course, some students, when they come in, they know who they want to work with, and then that just works out. But for a lot of students, this exercise of working with multiple faculties before committing helps. And then, down the line, if something bad happens, then again, the students can easily switch over to other faculty without having to worry about funding. So that definitely helps. It also helps the advisor, right? So they also get to work out, try out if this relationship is working or not, right? Without having to commit for 4 or 5 years of funding.
Yeah, we talked now a bit about Singapore versus Switzerland or Zurich in different aspects. Can you tell us a bit more about how the system, how the academic system works in Switzerland and at ETH specifically?
Yeah, so that was the other misunderstanding I had, or lack of understanding, was that I was under the impression that ETH works a lot like other European schools. Whereas when I was interviewing and later on when I was making the decision, it's not the case. I think ETH has this motto of taking best of both systems from Europe and from the US. So let me start, right? Funding wise, as I said, there are some certain number of students that are guaranteed by the department, and then rest of the students you have to fund them from your own grant. In terms of, I think the one big change was the amount of autonomy that professors get is significantly different than both NUS and US schools, right? So for example, the admission process at ETH is very autonomous. I can hire whoever I want. I don't have to wait for a periodic admission system and the department then admitting students and then me having to kind of pick students from that pool. It's very straightforward. As long as the student satisfies the requirements, I can just hire them, no questions asked. And I can do that at whatever time, right? If they want to join in the middle of the summer, they can do that. In winter, they can do that. So that's definitely helpful, right? I can then hire whenever I want, from wherever I want. So that comes with a bit of a responsibility, but I think for me, that's definitely helpful. I think the other big factor here is that, again, because of the funding model and the collaborative nature, I think at ETH, it's one of the places where you can take up big projects, which are a bit more long-term, maybe a bit more risky and so on, right? Because you can hire technical staff, you can hire PhD students very quickly, you can ramp up. So that's another thing that I'm observing, is that a lot of research groups here are taking up big challenges and systematically addressing them, which I think is also encouraged. So that is, again, a different thing. At least it's not based on, do you have X papers? It's based on, did you do something interesting and impactful? And this kind of percolates throughout, not only in the CS department, but from what I see, all the other departments at ETH as well. So that's a refreshing change. I think the other thing, as I said, the autonomy aspect also goes down to advisor being in charge of the group, right? So all the students and so on, they're part of of the group, and they work together and so on. So that to me also is a nice kind of environment, right? The students are they don't feel like, okay, this is my advisor, I have to work for them, and they get to decide whether I graduate or not. At least the groups that I have seen, it's more like, okay, this is the group, you're responsible for the group, be it teaching, be it administration, and so on. So I like that system better, right? There's some enthusiasm amongst the members of the group to kind of work together to make things smooth, to make things smooth. So yeah, I think that's good. I think the other, it's a very small thing, but now that I'm faculty, I have realized, I think the administrative support is also great. I had no clue why people kept telling me that administration support is important until I became a faculty. And so I think that's another thing at ETH is you can hire administration staff. For example, if you have large projects and you do need people to help you, you can hire them, which I think is still possible in some places in the US, but I think at ETH it's like a regular part of the system. And so that's also good, right? Yes, there's a lot of logistics because you're managing the entire group, but you can also get help when you need. So yeah, I think the last aspect, which to me at least came as a surprise, perhaps because you have been at ETH, maybe it was not a surprise for you, was the teaching model, right? As I said, the teaching responsibilities are assigned to each group, as far as I understand, and not to a faculty, right? Whereas I think both at NUS and almost all US schools, you have to teach certain number of courses per year, right? So for example, every semester you teach either a master's course or a PhD course or an undergraduate course. Whereas, and mostly it is a single faculty handles the entire course. Whereas at ETH, what I see is a lot of the courses are co-taught. And so that's great, right? I get to teach large courses, but then I don't have to handle everything. I can co-teach it with someone who's been doing it and slowly ramp up. And that also allows me to distribute my teaching workload in a much more controlled way rather than just having an option of teach this course or else, so yeah, that's also an interesting change. I don't know if I've not seen any other school where the co-teaching aspect is so ingrained in the system. I think, maybe it's a Swiss thing. I don't know.
Yeah, I think I was also not familiar with this model before starting.
Okay.
So, I guess the expectation is also, I think that every one, like PhD students, postdocs, and so on, have to more or less earn some, like one teaching credit or so per semester.
Right.
Basically so, teaching or teaching also. Yeah.
That's the thing. Yeah, that's why I said the teaching responsibility is assigned based on the size of the group. Right? If you have more members, you're expected to do more teaching, which I think is, I don't know how it works. My group is pretty small so far. And then since PhD students are employees, they have teaching responsibilities, and it's sort of mandatory for them to at least do some teaching per semester, which is again also true in most other places. Like at NUS, students have a compulsory TARs that they have to fulfill by the time of graduation. In the US, I think it's even more strict. Like if you're funded by the department, you have to do teaching for a certain number of hours and so on. But yeah, here again, right, I can, depending on the group size, students can decide, okay, this semester I want to focus on my research, I'm going to skip, and next semester I'll take a larger teaching load and so on. So that's also, I think if it functions correctly, then it's a good option to have.
Right, leave some flexibility.
Yeah, definitely, yes.
Yeah, you stayed as a postdoc at Berkeley for about 1 year, right? So how did you first of all decide to do a postdoc, and then also how did you use the time to prepare yourself and also for academic position then?
Yeah, so that was a bit of an interesting decision. So I was about to graduate from NUS, and I had at least a few options to go join the industry, but I was still I wanted to try out academia before giving up. And I was speaking with my mentors at NUS, and the advice I got was do a postdoc only if it is at a place where you think it will be helpful, right? Don't do a postdoc just for the sake of doing it at any random place. And so I took that advice a bit seriously. And so I think I only applied to Berkeley for a postdoc, and also because there was a particular project that was happening at Berkeley, which I felt I could contribute to, and it was mutually beneficial to do that. So the plan, so when I was doing this, my plan was to do a postdoc for at least 2 years. And yeah, I was not on the job market before going for a postdoc. So I went to Berkeley, I started the project. And there were projects in the pipeline which suddenly got accepted. And so my plan had to kind of shift a bit, right? So instead of going on the job market in the second year of postdoc, everyone was like, you should go on the market now. This is the best time to go. And so suddenly then I had to kind of apply in the first year itself. So I think I applied in like the 7th or 8th month of my postdoc. I was already looking for a new job. So that was a bit scary. And I think Berkeley is one of those places where there are a lot of students who are also applying and are also on the job market. Like when I was doing that, there were like 2-3 people in my lab who were also on the job market. So that's a good environment. You have people to share notes with, exchange notes with, like strategize and plan out. So I decided to go on the market like late in October of 2019, which was very, very late. As I later realized, all the other candidates had already decided like in August, and they had their letters and list of schools they were going to apply to. And by October, they were sending out applications. I think some schools had like first round of deadlines in mid-October, if I remember correctly. And so that was pretty scary. I was like, oh my God, first of all, I'm not mentally prepared. This was not the original plan, and now I'm late. And again, there were other commitments, right? Like there were papers to be written and research to be done. But fortunately, once I decided that this is what I'm going to do, my mentors both at Berkeley and at NUS were super helpful. First of all, they calmed me down. They said, yes, good, congratulations that you've decided to go on the market. It's still possible. It's not too late. And so I think after that, I just kept away all my work and focused on my applications. The biggest piece of work that I spent my time on was my research statement. So that took about, I would say, a month, more than that. Also, that was the first time I was writing a serious research statement. I'd written something for my thesis, but again, it was not for a broad, serious audience. And so it took a lot of time, a lot of revision, a lot of feedback, more importantly, to kind of get to a stage where I was like, okay, this is in good shape. I can start sending it out. I think also I was one of the applicants who applied late. Like my applications went out like on the day of the deadline, which was like last week of November, first week of December, and so on. Fortunately, it all turned out to be fine. And again, right, the network aspect of this helped. I think by that time, we also had a Slack channel where all the people who were on the job market were there. And so that was good, right? That was reassuring. People were saying, okay, I'm also still applying. So it was good to hear that I was like not the super late applicant. Yeah, so I think that was kind of the process.
And for the future work section of your research statement, so did you at the time already have a clear vision on what you wanted to write, or did you still need to invest lots of time to basically figure out what you want to talk about in this section?
I think I had a bunch of ideas that I wanted to note down. The feedback I got was don't make it too long and don't make it too vague, right? Don't make it too broad and blue sky and like let's change the world kind of a thing. So what I eventually ended up doing was I presented a kind of a theme of my future research. Like here is an interesting observation, and that's what I want to explore. Here is why it is possible for me to do, because it kind of borrows things from my previous research, and I also had to justify why it's not a minor delta. Right, it's a bit abstract, but yeah. So that was the coming up with ideas was not the problem. Phrasing them in a more understandable and okay, this really looks exciting kind of way is what took time. And I think again, right, because I was writing the entire research statement over and over, it kind of ended up getting revised because there was a story that I was trying to tell in my statement, and then the future work was kind of tying it up nicely. But yeah, I in my first few drafts, I had ideas which were like very, very specific and detailed. And then I had ideas which were like too broad. And so all the feedback I got was, okay, this is two extremes of the spectrum. Try to kind of find a middle ground. And so, yeah, that's what I did. I think the more important part of that exercise was, I mean, yes, you have to write something in the statement, but also when you go and do the interviews, this is something which you frequently get asked about. And so the feedback process helped me, decide how to pitch this idea, how to answer follow-up questions and so on, because I had already had practice of doing that in my writing feedback. So that I think was more helpful than the actual text that went in my statement.
I see. And with respect to the teaching statement, so did you have already much teaching experience in order to write a statement, or like how did you approach writing the statement?
I think teaching statement was one of those. I think I managed to write it in a couple of ways. I knew what to write, and also there was, I guess, it was much easier to write as compared to my research statement. One of the reasons was I had very particular research or very particular teaching experience. I had designed and taught a web security course at NUS. So that was my experience. And the nice part about it was I was one of the 2 TAs of that course, and the class was like large, 80, 90 students doing projects, right? The entire course was project-based. So I just decided, okay, that's the experience I have. That's what I'm going to write. I think the other surprise that came to me after reading a lot of other teaching statement was teaching statement also includes mentorship beyond classroom teaching. And so that was something also I could speak about because I had the experience of working with students both at NUS and at Berkeley. And so that was also kind of helpful to come up with a more genuine teaching statement. But yeah, looking at other students who basically come from the US schools, my teaching experience was not as exhaustive because there students like teach a course every year. They do tutoring. they do grading of like a course and in-class lecturing and all that. It's very intense. Whereas for me, I didn't have that much of experience. But I think in the end, it didn't make a big of a difference. I think what people were looking for is, does the candidate have like real teaching experience? And then what are their ideas about teaching, right? How do they approach teaching?
Some people, let me phrase this a bit provocative. So some people say that all that matters is basically the track record. So whether you did impactful research, and then also the letter writers. So what's your take on that?
So it is a controversial question, and
Right.
I think the answer is very subjective. There's of course a very big survivor bias in my case, right?
Mm-hmm.
I ended up with a job which I wanted, and so
Right.
I have evidence, but I don't know if there is counter arguments to that. But again, having looked at all the process for a couple of years, right, both as a candidate and also on the other side of the table, I think it's not as the formula is not so straightforward as 10 papers plus 3 excellent letter writers. I think it's more nuanced than that. First of all, a big factor to this is randomness or luck, or being at the right place at the right time. A lot of these schools, when they're hiring it as a plan of a strategy, right? So they are looking for a particular candidate. You might be the top candidate in area X, but I mean, the school is not looking for that at this time. They already have someone, or that's not an important area for them this year.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that's one big factor to consider. I think the other factor to consider is how do you present your research? You can be a candidate with, like, I don't know, 15 papers, for example. But if it's very difficult for you to coherently tell a research story, then probably it might work against you, having 15 papers and not being able to explain what is the story for this research. I think people also pay a lot of attention to the type of research questions you're looking at, and so again, you could have 6 papers, but they all are like outstanding papers addressing good research questions and so on. So those candidates might be preferred than others. I think the other factor is also, it varies from school to school what they are looking at or what they want in a candidate. So it's very complicated. is the short answer. What I can tell is how to maximize your chances, right? And again, after a certain point, number of papers don't really help, right? The moving from 12 papers to 13 papers won't make a big difference. What will make a difference is picking 2 or 3 of them and making an argument about why they are groundbreaking or why there is impact. Right? I think that's more useful. Also, people want a colleague who is a specialist in their area, of course, but also someone who can speak with the rest of the department and so on. So there is specialization, but there's also being able to generalize your work, being able to kind of communicate the importance of your problem and results and so on to non-experts in a convincing way. I think and it reflects both in your research statement and when you actually get the invitation for interview, right? So I would say, yeah, when you're thinking about this, try to decide how you want to shape how you want to present your research, right? It's okay to have 15 papers, but focus on 5 of them, which are what you think is as groundbreaking. There has also been some concerns about, but they are not first author on these papers and so on. Right? There's a lot of details that go into this. Again, as long as you have 2 or 3 good papers, and again, this is for systems and security, right? That's what I'm talking about. I don't know how it works in ML or theory or other areas, but for systems and security in general, having 2 or 3 solid papers with like good technical questions, good impact is enough to get at least some response from your committee, right? I think the letters are a good way of communicating things which you cannot say yourself, or you shouldn't be saying yourself, right? So one of these things is impact or contribution to papers where you are a co-author or not the lead author. So I have seen letters which clarify that, okay, yes, the candidate is claiming this impact and it's all true. And the advisor was not the reason why there was impact, it was the student's contribution and so on. Because that's also the other factor is that, the student works with X, Y, Z. And so, of course, all the contributions are not from the student, but from these other people, right? So good letters help kind of explain this situations, right? No, it's the student who has made all the difference. So I think that's one of the things people are looking for in letters. Yeah, I think the other places where committees look for or refer to letters is when there are multiple candidates in the same bucket, right? And they have to narrow it down, then they might look at letters and so on. But yeah, again, it's much more nuanced than just like sort based on number of papers or a number of strong letters.
I see. Yeah, that's all very helpful. To also briefly expand on what you said, because you said that institutions, for example, sometimes look for a person in a specific field also. And sometimes they already mentioned this in the call, right? That they are specifically, for example, encouraging people, let's say in quantum computing, to apply. Correct, so did you pay attention to this kind of things, or did you just apply to all kind of institutions you were interested in?
So what I did was I looked at the calls and I found 2 types of calls. One category was they were actually looking for people doing security or system security and so on. So those were easy, right? Of course, I was applying to them. There was also, security is one of these places where there are different terms people use. Sometimes it was cyber security, sometimes it was infrastructure security, trusted computing, a lot of these things. So those were all the calls that I decided to apply for. And then there were calls which were like general CS calls. Those were also something I applied for. And most of the calls, if you read them carefully, they say we're trying to hire, let's say, in PL and databases this year, but all other good candidates are encouraged to apply, and we might interview them if we come across something promising. So if I found that language where it said we are trying to hire an X and Y, but if you don't fit in this, you can still apply, then I applied to those as well.
I see. And did you also receive any invitations from institutions that had this kind of phrasing? You still remember?
I don't remember, unfortunately. I didn't keep track of that. Yeah. Now that I remember it did reflect in the eventual hiring decisions that the schools made. Right. That's the other catch, is that they're not hiring in your area. You apply, they think you're a good candidate, you interview, but they were very clear, right? This is not a priority. So if they end up finding good candidates in their target areas, then you will basically not get an offer. So that was the thing I did keep a note of, saying, okay, I'm applying. Even if I get a call, my chances here are, low.
And for how many institutions did you apply for, and like what were your kind of criteria? And also, as a third similar question, so what kind of advice do you have for strong candidates like you on the number of institutions to apply for?
Right. So let me break this down. Right. So as I said earlier, I was not planning to apply that year. The big reason for that was I didn't know if I'm a strong candidate or an average candidate or a weak candidate. So the advice I got, I mean, of course, my advisors or mentors told me that, you're a strong candidate, right? I was like, sure, you're three people who are saying that. I don't know that. And that was the other thing. I didn't have experience looking at, lab mates or peers going on the job market, especially in the US, and then like going through all this process. So for me, I didn't have the calibration of what is a good candidate and so on. And I guess I was misinformed because I was under this impression that, oh, okay, it's like 10 papers or some weird number like that. And so, yeah, by that mathematics, I did not consider myself as a strong candidate. So that's clarification number one. I think in terms of restrictions, I was pretty open to different locations and so on. So that also kind of reduced my filtering criteria. And then I think I applied to US, Canada, and Switzerland. So my geographical area was also a bit larger. Let's see, I ended up applying to, I think, 35 schools. And then some schools had multiple calls based on like departments and institutes. So I think in the end, I ended up making like 45 applications, which I was told later on is very, very large a number. Because usually people have restrictions, right? Be geographical restrictions and so on. So that kind of helps them filter out a lot of locations, which was not the case for me. The other thing candidates usually do is they strategize that this year they're only going to apply to top schools to kind of see what their chances are. And if that doesn't work out, they'll go to the non-top 10 schools. I didn't want to do that. I couldn't imagine putting myself through 2 cycles of job search. So I just went all out and applied. And that was the reason I had to balance it a bit, right? I couldn't apply to all top schools and then risk not getting any interviews or offers. So that's the reason that why the number was pretty large. And again, I think there were other candidates who also applied quite broadly, especially people who were looking for non-US schools. The number increases quite quickly.
Right. I think it's also for many of the candidates that I interviewed so far, they also have like around this many institutions they applied for. So it seems to be quite common.
Yeah. So, but again, right, that's why I said I do know a few people who were on the market with me and the subsequent year. They were very targeted, right? 10 schools, 12 schools, because those were their, nothing else would work, be it because of whatever, right? Visa restrictions, I don't know, two body challenges and so on.
And how did this then affect how many invitations you got?
Yeah, so that was the other surprising part. I ended up getting a lot of invitations. I think in the end it was 15 or 16 places that I got invited to. Oh. So yeah, around 33%. Yeah.
And how did you schedule the interviews? What kind of strategy did you use?
Yeah, so that was the other thing. So one was I applied quite late. So some of my interview calls came a bit later in the cycle. So I started hearing back from schools in second or third week of January. And by that time, schools had already kind of filled up interview slots. So my first interview was only last week of February, which I was more than comfortable with. But then a lot of other candidates were interviewing like early in January or something like that. So for me, my strategy was I had a fixed start date. Like I did not want to interview any time before that, which was like February end was my ideal start date. And so I only started giving out dates like February onwards. The other thing I did was I tried to not schedule more than 2 interviews per week. So I tried to like do 2 schools maximum a week. The other interesting thing in my case was I was on the West Coast and almost, except one, all my other schools were on the East Coast or like Europe. So in a normal world, I would have to travel every week from Berkeley to the East Coast and back and so on. So that was kind of the rough plan that I had. Yeah, and the people were also telling me to order schools in a way that try to keep safe schools early on, and then the schools I really am interested in the middle, and then try not to schedule interesting schools too late in the cycle because you're kind of tired of the process and so on. I tried to follow that advice, but frankly, with all the scheduling restrictions of my timeline and the school's timeline, it was very difficult to follow this. I was interviewing the entire month of March, right? 2 interviews almost every week, and then because I had so many schools, I ended up interviewing all the way until end of April, which was very, 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 very late as per like the other candidates. So that was kind of the plan. I went and did in-person interviews at 4 schools, yeah, and then the world just like came to a halt. That's another story.
I think that interviewing like with that many institutions also takes lots of, first of all, mental strength, and then also a strategy to keep motivated throughout the season. So did you have any kind of any secrets on how you stayed enthusiastic, motivated, and also at strength through this whole process and period?
Yeah, so frankly, I did not realize what I'm signing up for. I thought, 15 schools, piece of cake, right? Of course, you can travel and do all of this. Until my mentor started telling me, this is crazy. This is not how people usually do things. But again, a few of my mentors told me this is fine. They've done it before. It's possible if you do it wisely. And so there were a few things that I followed. I tried to isolate my interview days, right? So I had one day before and one day after the interview. I kind of used that as a way to get into the zone for that school. So that definitely helped. The other thing that helped was I had no other commitments. I had told all my collaborators and everyone that I'm basically not available for any meetings, don't expect any research output from me and so on. So that also helped quite a lot. And I think the other important thing was I tried to, as I said, the day before, I tried to look through the school again, just to refresh my memory, prepare for my one-on-ones the day before. I have a very short memory, so I decided, just do it one day before and so on. So that was useful. I think the other thing that helped was I was super excited to speak with all these people. So I never felt like, oh my God, this is, yet another interview. I really looked forward to all my interviews and so on. So that definitely, I think, was an advantage in my case. What else? I think the other surprising thing that happened was I realized I don't have the stamina to speak for like 8 hours a day. And at least when I was going for in-person interviews, it was a bit better because I got breaks in the middle. I had like breakfast and then I had dinner with the committees, and there was some time in the middle. But the moment everything moved online, it was back to back 8 hours sitting in the chairs in front of Zoom meetings. So that was also a big change. But again, I think just having this excitement, I think was was helpful. The other advice I would give is not to try to isolate as much as possible, and be there when you're doing the interview. I realized sometimes you might be like, there's time zone issues and so on. So it's very difficult. Yes, you're excited, but like physically, if you've not gotten enough sleep or you're interviewing in the middle of the night, then it's going to be difficult to like be 100%. So I think take all these factors into account while scheduling. Don't get pressurized into scheduling things when you're not comfortable, because that's going to just ruin your chances. The committee is not going to take this into consideration once you've committed to that date.
To also expand on this, so I mean, like you said, it's very exciting but also exhausting, an interviewing day. And at least for me, I felt it was important, and I'm always like 100% fit on this day.
Right.
Actually, for one day, I had a migraine which significantly affected my performance during this day. So did this also happen to you in some sense, that on some day where you're interviewing, you didn't feel 100% well or so? And how did this influence your experience and performance?
I don't remember any particular example where I was not feeling up to it. But one big problem with all my scheduling was that, as I said, all my interviews were on the East Coast, which meant being on the West Coast, my interview started at like 5 o'clock in the morning. And this was during work from home. So I had to get up at like 4 in the morning and be ready for my 5 o'clock interview, which went all the way to like 3 or 4 in the afternoon, without any lunch breaks or breakfast breaks, because like the time zones didn't match. So that, I think, was a very difficult transition. What I did was basically I shifted my schedule. I started living on the East Coast time. That helped a bit. And then sometimes, if I was not feeling up to it, I told myself, okay, this is a problem, and not to have hopes from that school, because I'm really not up to it. So but fortunately, I think I was very fortunate that it did not happen to me. And in a way, I think I would end up in that situation if I had to physically travel to places, because even though it's tiresome, and there is also a lot of, I don't know, cognitive work that goes into switching flights, going to airports, coming back, and so on. So I think the 4 schools I did in person, that aspect actually was quite draining, that I had to physically travel and so on. Whereas the online interviews actually were quite easier for me. Yeah.
And in the process, did you decline any of the interview invitations?
Yeah. So I did not decline in interviews, fortunately, because I was always able to find time slots. As it happens, the interviews got cancelled. So I think one of the schools just said they're not hiring anymore, and they cancelled my interview. One of the schools, I think, I had 2 days of interview, and after the first day, they told me, by the way, they are in a hiring freeze, but they gave me the option to continue my second day of the interview just in case. So that was, I think, the most difficult situation, where I knew there is a hiring freeze and I was just interviewing for the sake of it. And then I think a couple of other schools, while I was interviewing, there was a news that school has entered into hiring freeze. So that was a bit of a, I don't know, difficult thing to deal with. But yeah, again, as I said, by that time I had reached a stage where I was just excited to talk to people, and I had an offer. So it didn't impact my performance that much. I was not stressed about, oh my God, like there is hiring freeze, and that reduces my chances of getting a job.
Yeah, unusual interviewing times.
Yeah, it was. It was quite unusual. And again, as I said, the good part was having a support system, and there was the Slack channel where everyone was exchanging notes about these things. It helped because I could see that coming, right? I was prepared. I could see other people are going through it, but it was also a bit, anxiety inducing to like dreadfully open that Slack channel. I was like, oh my God, okay, this school is also now into hiring freeze and so on. But yeah, I was very, very fortunate to land a job.
Yeah, and what did your visit at ETH look like? What was the structure and the process?
Yeah, so again, I interviewed remotely with ETH, partly because of the pandemic, partly because of visa issues. I would say it was, there were a couple of big differences. One was my interview, all my one-on-one interviews at ETH were 1 hour time slots, which was the longest. Right? All my other one-on-ones were 20 minutes, 30 minutes at the max. So I was a bit worried, but it actually turned out to be quite useful. 2 days I had one-on-one interviews with, I think, 14 or 15 people. And so this allowed me to know about the non-technical aspects of ETH from different faculty. And it also allowed us to go into the technical details and actually discuss some of the ideas that I presented in my job talk and future work and so on. So actually, I was pleasantly surprised that 1 hour interviews were helpful. So that was the one big difference. I think the second big difference was ETH was one of the only places where I had a committee interview, which I knew they had told me that this is going to happen, but it was an exciting experience, I would say. So maybe I can summarize. So a committee interview is something where all the people who are on the hiring committee are in the same physical room or Zoom meeting, and you're asked to present 5 to 10 minutes of your research plans and teaching plans. And this is like a closed door meeting, which is separate from your job talk. And so the goal of this meeting is for the hiring committee to basically ask any clarifying questions and basically ask more aggressive questions, which are not suitable for a public talk. Mm-hmm. So that was new. It was a bit intimidating because it's like 16, 17 people. I knew few of them, but there were also people from industry, government. I also saw a few people from EPFL on the committee. So, and also very wide set of audience. So that gave me a chance to make a case for myself. So there were questions about, okay, this is your research plan. How are you actually going to do it? And a lot of interesting questions. So after that interview, I got really excited about ETH. I was like, okay, this is a serious place. And they were open enough to, ask all these questions outright instead of making assumptions and so on. So I was super excited after that. I was like, okay, this is a place I would really want to go to if they made me an offer.
I remember I also had one of these kind of interviews, not at ETH, but an institution in the US. And I remember it was intense, but also exciting.
Yeah, exactly. And that was I don't know. I didn't have any of these. I did have a few interviews where it was an open interview. Any faculty could join and ask questions, but it was not as serious and well planned as this committee interview.
And then afterwards, after interviewing with the different institutions, how long did it take to hear back?
So a few schools got back immediately, like in 2-3 days or a week's time, saying we are excited to make you an offer. But all of this was oral offer, as they say. It's not the official written offer. So I think 3 of the schools I heard back from them in a week's time, saying the feedback from the committee was positive. We are ready to make you an offer. And the general understanding was we will make you a written offer when you're ready to make a decision, because written offers usually have a have a deadline. So in the normal world, that's how it would work. But I think because of the pandemic, a lot of schools panicked. And I think at least 2 of the schools who had made me oral offer came back and said, okay, now we have to make you a written offer and we can't give you too much time to think about it. I think almost all my US offers were of that nature, where they called me up and said, it's time that we make a written offer because we don't know when the funding might freeze. And we can't give you more than 2 or 3 weeks to make the decision. So that was a bit problematic for me because, as I said, I was interviewing late, like till the end of April. But yeah, fortunately, I think most of the timelines worked out. I got at least 3-4 days where I had all my offers and I got to decide what to do.
And how did you converge towards a decision?
I think the one of the biggest factors for me was US versus non-US. Like, do I want to leave US or not? And the other factor that I was considering was collaboration. Is it a good place to kind of execute the kind of research plans I have, be it in terms of getting students, collaborations in the department, funding, and so on. So that was one like very pragmatic part of it. And then I think the other part of it was very personal in the sense of where do I see myself staying long term and so on. So fortunately for me, because I did not do my PhD in US, my emotional ties were not that close to the US. So I could like freely think about non-US options. But yeah, I think eventually I made the decision on my gut feeling. I don't think there was any strategy involved in that.
Right. And what kind of advice do you have on negotiating?
Yeah, so that was the other aspect of the job market experience that was impacted by COVID. So typically, in a normal hiring cycle, you finish all your interviews and you get all your offers by end of April. Then you do second visit to places where you're interested. You have like at least 2-3 weeks to revisit these places. You get the chance to like ask provocative questions to the department and so on. I did not get any of that experience. I think I did a couple of virtual second visits. I mean, there's not a lot to it. And the same thing happened to negotiations. There was no room for negotiation. I was actually at a disadvantage because people were like, here is our offer. We don't even know whether we can, unless you sign it immediately next week, we don't know whether the money will exist or not. So unfortunately, I did not negotiate at all. I checked with other applicants. I heard the same thing, that there was not a lot of room, or even schools were not in the mood to negotiate, was the phrase. But what did end up happening was because I had told other schools I have multiple offers and I was not going back to them with a decision immediately. They sensed that I'm trying to negotiate, although I was not. And then I think at least 1 or 2 of the schools said, if you want, we can increase your startup budget or something like that. But yeah, I don't remember any serious negotiation with the exception of ETH. I think that's the other big difference with ETH is that there is an official phase where you do multiple rounds of negotiation with the president's office. And so it's not optional. You have to do it. And there's a procedure for that negotiation. So that was the only ETH was the only school where I negotiated. And I think the strategy was to just be as transparent. Like, here is my research plan. Here is what equipment I need. Here is how much student funding I need. And here are my other offers. And here are the salaries and so on. That was the approach I took. And I think it worked out. But again, I did not do this multiple school thing. So I don't know.
Yeah. I would say with that, we can slowly wrap up. So I have a couple of final questions. And one question is, what kind of special memories do you have from the process? Any kind of anecdotes that you can share, for example?
I think the one big positive thing that came out of the interview experience was I got to meet a lot of people and actually have a serious discussion with them. I got to share my work with a lot of people, be it students, faculty, and so on. So that to me was something very valuable, like and useful. I think the other part of it was getting challenged in very different ways. So as an academic, you're used to getting challenged about a particular paper, probably, or your thesis defense or something like that. Whereas the most of the interviewing process was getting challenged at a meta level. Like there were questions like security is not a serious research field, or like some questions like that, which were thought provoking if taken in a positive spirit, and that I think was a transformational experience for me. Yeah, and I think the second one was just the excitement of being able to have these opportunities. I think was good for me. I think to give anecdotes, I think I really enjoyed speaking with a few people, uh, and they were super helpful, super encouraging, although they did not have any reason to be, right? So those were some of the good memories that I have. Yeah.
And what was the role of mentors in the whole process? You already mentioned at the beginning that your PhD and postdoc advisor were very helpful, right?
Yeah, so I in fact was very fortunate to have various levels of mentors. So my PhD advisor back at NUS, my other collaborators at NUS, faculty collaborators at NUS were also very helpful. At Berkeley, I had a couple of advisors. So I had a good range of people at different stages of their career. And because of their experience, they were able to share their insights about the decision-making process or how to approach this whole thing, the ups and downs and all of it. So that was very reassuring to know that, I'm not an exception. This is a very normal part of the process. So just hearing that was good. I think I also had non-faculty mentors, meaning people who had been on the job market before, or people who were on the job market with me, and so on. So their contributions also were quite significant. Of course, family and friends support, right? Just having someone, a bunch of people who are not academics, to just rant after interviews was definitely very helpful.
Okay. And as a last question, what kind of final advice would you have for future faculty candidates?
That's a that's a good question. I think I've covered most of it, but I think to end on a positive note, I would say there's a lot of randomness in the process, and the only constructive way to work through it is to basically have a strategy and try to optimize for your outputs. Try to plan early and try to focus on things like impact and how to communicate your research results and so on to people who are not experts in the area. That's something which you can't improvise on the spot. That's something which takes time and training and practice. So start early, be in the mode of I'm going to be on the market next year, look at other people's experiences and try to practice just communicating your research to non-experts in the department.
Okay, then thank you so much, Shweta, for sharing all of this with us. And yeah, it was great having you.
Thanks a lot, Manuel, for putting these questions together. I really enjoyed answering them. And yeah, hopefully people will find this helpful.